Everybody, time for another reading. This is from Madcap Family Book 1. It is episode 38, Baby Name Debate. At the dinner table, everyone was throwing out possible names for the twin baby girls. AJ had a question. Why did you guys do our names alphabetically? He asked. Stella spoke up. AJ, you were named after your dad. I named Benjamin after my dad. When Caleb and David came along, that was the moment that your dad and I decided to carry on from Ben and do a C and D name. Then along came Elijah, and finally Francine. We were on a roll by then. Ben spoke up. So, will these girl names begin with G and H? What do you guys think about that? Do you think we should? Alden questioned. Stella spoke up. We could vote on it, she replied. The kids looked interested. They voted. It was unanimous. Yes, they would stick with the babies' names starting with G and H. Everyone wrote down their G names. The names were placed in a bowl. One by one, Stella removed the names. Gloria, Georgina, Gabriella, Genevieve, Gemma. Some of the kids had chosen the same name. Gabriella was chosen more than once. Finally, Stella came to the last name. It was hard to read. She knew it was Franny's handwriting. Stella turned to Franny. What is this, Franny? G, and then I think it's a U. Franny scowled. I thought this was super top secret. How do you know that piece of paper is mine? Francine looked suspicious. Stella smiled. Well, just a good guess. Is this your paper, honey? What does this say? Franny looked at the paper. It says Gussie. Alden arched his eyebrows. Franny, you want to name the baby after our old mule, Gussie? Alden questioned. Franny smiled. I sure did love that old mule. I could ride her all day long, Franny stated. Ben piped up, laughing out loud. You did not ride Gussie. Gussie never moved. You sat on her all day long. Franny shrugged. Sat, rode, that's no, never mind. She was a good mule. I loved her so much. I say we name the baby Gussie. Stella looked uncomfortable. Alden seemed unsure how to fix this problem, because no way were they naming their baby Gussie. Elijah spoke up. The Latin meaning for Gussie is majestic and grand. It also means dignity. It was a name given to female relatives of Roman emperors. It is also the feminine form of Augustus. Franny's jaw dropped. Are you kidding me, Elijah? Ugh. Franny made a sound of disgust. Franny propped her chin on her hand, looking defeated. Elijah adjusted his glasses. He peered at Franny. Problem, little sis? Elijah asked. Franny practically vibrated with indignation. I know this girl at school. Her name is Augustus Penterman. She is so mean. Franny turned to her parents. I do not want the baby's name to be Gussie or Augustus. Never, never name her that. Franny started gesturing wildly. Now, every time I think of Gussie, I will think of Augustus. If I think of Augustus, I will think of Gussie. You ruined my name, Elijah. Franny crossed her arms and pouted. Franny shook her head, looking so upset. Now I will never think of Gussie the mule the same way, ever, never, Franny said dramatically. Alden and Stella looked over Franny's head at Elijah and mouthed, Thank you. Elijah shrugged. He looked at his parents and replied, I'm here for you. My pleasure. So glad I could help. Franny was too consumed with sadness about poor old Gussie to pay any attention to their conversation. Stella patted Franny on the arm. It is okay, honey. Daddy and I just wanted some of your ideas, but in the end, Daddy and I will choose. But thank you, Stella stated. David spoke up. He had been so quiet. I really like Grace, he stated. Stella and Alden looked at each other. That name had not been in the bowl. The more Stella thought about the name Grace, the more right it felt. Why did you not write that one down, David? Stella asked. It just sort of came to me, David shrugged. Stella looked down at her belly. She ran her hand over her stomach and whispered, Hello, Grace. Stella looked up. Alden was smiling and nodded. Good going, David. Grace it is, Ben beamed. David smiled so big. He was so proud that he got to name baby G. AJ patted David on the back. Good job, baby bro. Good name. I like it. Alden handed out pieces of paper. They all wrote down H names and tossed them in the bowl. Alden took each paper out of the bowl and unwrapped them. Alden seemed shocked. Well, this is amazing, Alden exclaimed. What do they say? Stella questioned. Alden laid down the first name, and so on. Hannah, 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 Hannah. There was one Haley and a Holly, and in Franny's handwriting, another Hannah spelled Hanuh. Stella looked at all the names. The room grew quiet. Again, Stella looked down at her belly. She placed her hand on it and spoke. Hello, Hannah. Stella looked up. Everyone was smiling. Alden nodded yes. Stella felt tears gather in her eyes. They had their babies' names. The first baby born would be Grace Natalie, after Grandma Nettie, Westman. The second baby born would be Hannah Rose Westman. So Natalie after Alden's mom, and Rose after Stella's mom. Growing up on a farm, the kids had a better idea of where babies came from and a rough idea of how. When Caleb spoke up, everyone was stunned. Good thing you went back to that doc, Dad, and got chopped. Otherwise, we would be trying to come up with Z names. Zechariah, Xander, Zebediah, Zach, Zoe. Caleb kept spouting out Z names until they were all dying laughing. Alden was a little red in the face, but even he saw the humor in the whole situation. Alden ruffled his hair. David shoved his brother good-naturedly. Caleb pretended to fly out of his chair as usual. He rolled around on the floor, making choking sounds. Stella was not sure if Caleb and David would be future actors or stuntmen. It could go either way. The twins were always diving and stepping over light sockets like they were laser beams. They were always rolling off the back of the couch, army crawling like they were in a war zone, shrieking and making noises at the dinner table. Then they would look at each other, grunting and nodding their heads at their own strange communication. They drove Stella crazy when they would point at each other without words, pealing with laughter. Stella caught them practicing pretend punching each other one day, but it looked so real. Stella was washing dishes, looking out the window at the boys playing. David pulled his arm back. He slugged his brother in the face. Caleb grabbed his face, fell to the ground, screaming like he was dying. Stella ran out the door, shrieking at David, wanting to know why he hit his brother like that. Caleb jumped up unhurt. Both boys laughed hysterically. The boys told her they were playing stuntman. Later that night, Stella went to bed whispering, Good night, Grace. Good night, Hannah. I love you. Oh, one more thing, girls. Please be sweet and calm. I'm not sure I can handle two more versions of Caleb and David. Stella thought maybe, just maybe, she was expecting way too much. Okay, just be you. I love you. Stella promptly fell asleep. Episode 39. Not So Fun Summer. Summer arrived in White Cloud, Michigan. The sun blazed down and the humidity was high. Cara and Stella lived in the pool. The guys teased them and asked them if they planned on having a water birth. Stella was 6.5 months along and Cara was already 2 days late. Alden blew up the pool chairs so the ladies were resting comfortably, floating lazily in the water. Cara was petite, but her belly was not. Stella eyed Cara. She looked like she had a watermelon sticking straight out the front of her bathing suit top. Cara saw Stella eyeing her belly. She grimaced. I know. I look ridiculous, Cara. Cara shook her head in disgust. Stella shook her head. No way, girl. It is what it is. Cara frowned and looked down at her stomach. Cara rubbed her forehead like she had a headache. At dinner time, I can lay my plate on my stomach and it stays put. Stella stared at Cara. She did not look so good. She seemed to be almost stammering. You are all belly, girl. Your arms and legs are skinny, and even your butt looks good. Your chest has improved, but your belly just sticks straight out like a watermelon. Cara tried to laugh, but she acted like it took too much effort. So what Nick says. Stella peered at Cara. Stella frowned. Where were the guys? Stella was getting a bad feeling here. She thought that Cara looked a bit pale. She had a huge water bottle stuck in her cup holder on her blow-up chair. Cara kept picking it up, drinking thirstily. Was her hand shaking? Stella gnawed on her lower lip. You having any pain, Cara? You look a bit off, and you were due, what, 2 days ago? I just feel so tired. This pregnancy has been so completely different. I felt wonderful until about 2 weeks ago. I was so sick last week with that cold that I could not get out of bed. I missed my last doctor's appointment. I have been feeling a bit dizzy, just off. So when do you go back to see Dr. Will? Stella asked. Cara thought for a second. She seemed a bit confused. Stella was getting very alarmed. It is written on the at home. For the life of me, I cannot remember the day. Do not look so alarmed, Stella. Part of my problem is that the doctor says the baby is what is that called when they are butt first? Stella gasped. What? The baby is breech? Stella was almost frantic. Cara groaned. Why is she taking so long? My other two came early and she is staying camped in there. Cara licked her lips. Cara acted like her mouth was as dry as dust. She picked up her bottled water and drank some more. The bottle was almost empty. Alden and Nick wandered down to the pool carrying fruity drinks with fancy umbrellas in them, non-alcoholic, of course. Stella took her drink, but she turned to Nick without drinking it. Nick, I'm worried about Cara. She is not looking so good. I cannot put my finger on it, but something is off. She is slurring her words, stuttering, and acting very confused. Cara shook her head. I am fine, Stella. I just need to have this baby already. Cara grabbed her empty bottle and gave it a shake. I am so thirsty. Lately, I cannot seem to get enough to drink. I drink and drink. Cara sounded like she was falling asleep. Stella went still at Cara's statement. Wait, how long have you felt like this? Stella questioned. About the last 2 weeks. Like I said, I've been so sick. I am thirsty all the time. I just cannot think straight. Stella looked at Nick. You need to call the doctor right away, Nick. Sounds like she could be having some sugar problems. She needs to go in right away and get checked, Stella demanded. Stella leaned forward and snatched Cara's drink away. It was full of sugar. Stella was no doctor, but if her sugar was high, that drink would not help the situation. Stella's obvious alarm rubbed off on Nick. Nick picked up his cell phone, turned away from the pool, and stuck one finger in his other ear so he could hear. Nick explained what was going on. They directed him to take her straight to the hospital. It was the 4th of July. Stella steered Cara out of the pool. Cara staggered. Her eyes rolled back, and she started to go limp. Stella looked at Alden, panic written all over her. Alden jumped in, clothes and all. Nick saw what was happening from across the yard. He sprinted. Nick wrapped a towel around her as they got her up the pool steps. I am taking her as is. They can dry her off when we get there, Nick exclaimed. Nick put his arm around his wife. Alden kept a hold of her other arm. You are right, Stella. She is not acting right at all. Nick was starting to look frightened. Wait, Stella said. Sit her down. I am calling an ambulance. You may need help with her. Plus, the first responders are just down the road at the big Prairie Fire Barn. They're having a picnic down there, doing some water shows with the fire trucks. They can get here fast, Stella exclaimed. Stella called 911. She explained the situation. She stayed on the phone until the first responders showed up. Alden assured Nick that the kids would be fine. Cara just nodded tiredly. Cara mumbled something about loving her kids. She seemed sluggish. Her eyes were closed now, tears streaming down her face. She looked around listlessly. She wasn't responding to any of the questions that the emergency personnel asked her. They asked Cara if she knew her name. Do you know where you are? Do you know what day it is? The first responders poked Cara's finger, but the meter kept saying error. Cara mumbled something incoherent, while Nick stood by helplessly. The ambulance showed up. Cara was loaded up. Nick was going to jump in the ambulance, but they needed room to work. They encouraged Nick to follow them. Stella took Nick's arm. Can you drive? You may want a car there anyway, Stella asked. Nick nodded. He jumped in his car and raced to catch up to the ambulance. Episode 40. Waiting. Stella was so worried about Cara. She really wanted to be at the hospital, but she did not want to be in the way. Stella got dressed in a summer dress that kept her comfortable and cool. She waited by the phone. Worry gnawed at her. She had a bad feeling about this whole situation. Alden walked through and saw Stella sitting quietly in the living room, staring off into space. Alden crouched down in front of Stella. Babe, why don't you go on over to the hospital? I can see how worried you are. I think you will be less stressed if you are closer to her. Stella teared up. She caressed Alden's cheek. Have I told you lately how much I love and appreciate you? Because I really do, Stella stated. Alden smiled. It is still nice to hear. Come on, you get yourself over to Spectrum Gerber. You will feel better if you are there. Stella got ready and drove to Fremont. From Hardy Dam, it takes about 20 minutes to get there if you drive the speed limit. Stella parked. She sailed past the front desk and took the elevator to the birthing floor. Stella had birthed all her babies here. Their maternity delivery floor is top-notch. Stella was buzzed in by the nurse managing the desk. When she went around the corner, Stella felt dread wash over her in waves. Nick was seated on a bench, his hands covering his face. Nick was shaking and crying. Stella picked up speed. She quickly sat down, placing her hand on Nick's back. Nick, please tell me what is going on. Is Cara okay? Nick looked up. He looked devastated. When we got here, she was still not responding. She was staring off. Her eyes were open, Stella, but she could not answer. Then she closed her eyes. They could not wake her up. Stella could feel her heart slamming. Where was her friend? Why wasn't Nick with her? They are prepping her for emergency surgery. Normally, I could be in there with her for a C-section, but she is critical. At the word critical, Stella put her hand over her mouth to stop the sobs that were rising. She felt bile gather in her throat. Nick faced Stella completely. She went into a diabetic coma, Stella. When they hooked her up to the baby monitors, the baby was in distress. It all happened so fast. Nick grabbed his hair, shaking with rage. I should have seen this. I just didn't. I kept asking her how she was doing, and she kept saying she was fine. I thought she was just exhausted because she was close to giving birth. You cannot blame yourself, Nick. You are not a doctor. You are not at fault. I did not notice at first. I realized that she was drinking a lot of water and she started talking odd. She seemed confused and very tired. Nick shook his head. 2 weeks ago, she got a bad freak summer cold. She was flat down. I tried to get her into the doctor, but she just kept saying it was a cold and her nose was so plugged. Her nose was as red as a berry. Cara called the doctor. They put her through to the triage nurse, and they could hear how stuffed she was. There is nothing she can take while she is pregnant, so they let her miss her appointment. I am not upset with them. The cold was real. Stella nodded. No one is at fault. After the cold, did she go back into the doctor? No, she was rescheduled, but she wasn't due to go back for 2 more days. Even though she was overdue, they do not worry too much. Babies come when they are ready. Nick looked at Stella. The cold just masked the symptoms of the sudden sugar issues. She was feeling so bad, but part of it had to be the sugar problems. Her sugar was so high they could not even read it. Stella got tears in her eyes. She had to breathe. She had to calm herself down. Nick pulled out his phone. He looked lost and put it back. They sat together for an hour in total silence. Stella called Alden to fill him in. He was extremely upset. He told Stella to reassure Nick that the kids were doing great. AJ, Mary, and Ben were on board and helping. Stella told Nick, he even smiled a little, nodding his head. Annie called. She had heard through Alden what was happening. Annie told Stella, Tom says that if Nick needs help at his steel fab shop, that he would be more than happy to man the office. Maybe deal with anything Nick might need help with. This is what Tom does, but his shop is shut down for 2 weeks. They are moving the entire fab shop out of Grand Rapids, transferring to Coopersville, so Tom is free to help. Stella turned to Nick. I know this might not be what you want to talk about right now, but Tom is getting on the line. He is available for the next 2 weeks. He is offering to help you out at your fab shop so you can be with Cara. Nick grabbed the phone. He seemed to want a distraction. Oh, hey, Tom. Yeah, I am doing the best that I can. Are you serious about helping? Because if you are, I could really use you. Let me call you back later tonight after I find out what is going to happen with Cara. I really appreciate this, Tom. You have no idea. Then Nick choked up, unable to continue. Stella took the phone and finished up the call. Finally, Dr. Wills appeared. He looked so serious. Dr. Wills grabbed a chair and set it in front of Nick. She's alive, Nick, and the baby is fine. Nick broke down, sobbing quietly, shaking. He grabbed Dr. Will's hand and held on. Please tell me everything, Doc. Dr. Will sighed. Cara's sugar level spiked so high, as you know, it caused her to go into a diabetic coma. Thank goodness she got here so fast, and she was here when it happened. If she had gone into a coma at home in her sleep, she and the baby would probably not have made it. Nick nodded, but he was visibly appalled at the thought. Doc went on to say, because we were right here, she got medical attention immediately for the coma. That is huge. People that go into a coma usually can recover completely with no ill effects. She could fully recover. Don't give up, Nick, because I am not going to. Nick kept listening. Stella was not so sure that he could speak. So what is being done for her now? How long do you think she will be in this coma? Stella asked. Cara is being treated with IV fluids and insulin. We must wait and see. We do not know. The next 48 hours are critical. You can't stay here overnight, Nick. She is in the intensive care unit. Why can't I be with her in her room? Nick questioned. Because she is in intensive care. She is hooked up to a lot of tubes and wires. There isn't room in there for you. Plus, it is not allowed. Dr. Wills placed his hand on Nick's shoulder. Have faith, Nick. We are already managing to balance her glucose levels. I am very hopeful. Stella sighed with relief. Cara was not out of the woods yet. But that was indeed good news. Nick seemed more relaxed hearing that as well. Dr. Wills smiled at Nick. By the way, would you like to meet your daughter? Nick's eyes got huge. I cannot believe I was so focused on Cara. I am such a bad dad. Nick smiled and wiped his tears at the same time. Stella laughed. Well, then I am a bad auntie because I was so focused on Cara also. I cannot wait to see her. Nick looked concerned. She's okay, right, Doc? She was in distress. Was there anything wrong? Dr. Wills walked us towards the nursery. She was just being stubborn. She would not turn, and she just needed to be born. I have to say, she is a beauty. Nick grinned with fatherly pride. But how soon can I see Cara? Nick looked anxious. Right after you meet your daughter. We will get you to the intensive care unit. Right now, your wife is on one floor, and your daughter is on this floor. Nick looked stressed. Dr. Wills reassured him. Don't feel so bad, Nick. At one point, I had the helicopter on standby just in case one of them had to be airlifted. Luckily, we did not have to do that. Nick paled at the thought. Things could have been so much worse. Dr. Wills turned to Stella. How are you holding up? You need to watch your stress, Stella. I must admit, I was a bit of a wreck, but I have been sitting here practicing my meditation exercises. It is really helping. Plus, I have total faith in you, Doc, Stella replied. They arrived at the nursery. The doctor had the nurse put them in an empty room. The nurse came in, pushing the baby bed. Nick's beautiful baby girl rested inside. She was gorgeous. Nick could not rip his eyes from her. She was a miniature version of Cara. Blonde curls peeked out from under her pink hospital cap. Her skin was rosy. She was sleeping and swaddled. Nick removed her swaddling, wanting to check his daughter over. He placed his finger in her palm. She squeezed her tiny little hand around his finger. Stella smiled at Nick. What are you going to call her? Stella asked softly. We decided on Addison. Addison Lee Westman. Nick looked up at the nurse. She was jotting that down, asking him the spelling. She then pointed at the baby's ankle. We have a new level of security here at the hospital. That ankle bracelet runs through our Wi-Fi here at the hospital. It is a locator bracelet. It alerts us and tells us always where the baby is. All entrances and exits are under protection. Trust me when I say alarms do sound. The nurse smiled. I will go and write up a name tag to put on Addison's bed. I will be right back. Nick checked out the ankle bracelet on his daughter's right ankle. He thought that was very cool that his daughter had this level of protection. Stella got a turn holding sweet Addison. She would have to tell Alden about the new security. She was extremely impressed with it. Nick sighed, looking stressed again. You okay, Nick? I want to see Cara. I feel sick inside, Stella. Nick watched as Stella ran her finger softly down Addison's cheek. Cara should be here, Stella. We should be seeing her and holding her together. Nick looked so bereft. Stella handed Addison back to him. Sometimes life just doesn't cooperate. You are right, she should be here, but I believe with every part of me that she is going to be fine. Right now, Cara would want you to bond and spend time with your baby girl. She would be ticked off if you did not. Nick smiled with unshed tears in his eyes. You are so right, Stella. Cara may be tiny, but she can pack a punch. I try very hard not to tick her off. Nick grew thoughtful. Not many people know this, but when we were trying to have a baby and it just was not happening, Cara and I started to have some marriage problems. Having a baby should not be that hard, but it was. Every month that went by and Cara was not pregnant, she started to take the blame, thinking that she was less of a woman. Ridiculous. Stella waited. She was sure there was more. I yelled at her. I told her I did not want any more children if it was going to ruin our marriage. Now, looking at Addison, if Cara pulls through, it will all be worth it, but I really need to see her. The nurse returned, letting them know that it was time to feed the baby. Nick stopped her. Wait, my wife was very adamant about breastfeeding. How in the world are we going to do that? Our son Finn, as well as Molly, tend to have food allergies, severe food allergies. Cara really wanted to breastfeed this baby as long as possible. The nurse seemed stumped. Well, we do have breast milk that is donated. It is screened and certified. We could give that to her instead of formula. Nick thought about that. He was unsure which way to go. Give the baby breast milk from a donor or formula? Nick turned to Stella. What do you think, Stella? Any ideas? Stella thought about it for a minute. Cara is going to be so mad. She's always going on and on about her antibodies, how much she wanted to breastfeed her last baby. Stella looked stumped for a minute and then she said, Wait, can you pump can you pump her breasts? Stella felt a bit embarrassed asking that question, but she knew Cara would rather her daughter have her breast milk above and beyond anything else. The nurse looked a bit flummoxed. She was stunned. She had never been asked this before. Uh, Let me get a hold of Dr. Wills. He is still here. I'm going to let him handle this situation. Soon Dr. Wills showed back up. I hear you have a few questions. Dr. Wills was grinning from ear to ear. Nick turned a bright red color. Hey, Doc, you know that Finn and Molly both suffer from food allergies. Cara was adamant about breastfeeding this child as long as possible. She was working when she had our other two babies, and we formula fed them. She stressed to me how important it was that she breastfeed this baby. What are your thoughts on this? Dr. Wills grinned. You slightly freaked my nurse out about your question of pumping your wife's breasts while she is in a coma. Nick blushed again. Doc, I know this may sound a bit nutty, but if this is possible at all, we should do it. Doc, do you really want to face Cara and tell her that you could have done this, but you didn't? Dr. Wills thought about that for a minute. He grimaced at the thought of Cara being ticked off at him. She's tiny, but fierce. Honestly, women that are diabetics that give birth, I tend to encourage them to breastfeed. All mothers, diabetic or not, experience hormonal changes and metabolic changes after giving birth. There are advantages to breastfeeding. It tends to reduce the impact of the changes that are occurring in their bodies. I would have to agree that this would be okay if you honestly believe that she would want this. You are her husband, Nick. You can say yes to this. Nick nodded. I really believe that she would want this. Stella put in her 2 cents. Knowing Cara, I would agree with Nick. She would want it this way. Dr. Will stood up. I will get things going on my end. I need you to get with the nurse and sign some stuff okaying this whole situation. No problem, Nick stated. The nurse came back. Nick signed the necessary paperwork. Nick questioned her about seeing his wife. The nurse directed us to the intensive care floor. We took the elevator and found ourselves standing at the nurse's station. Hi, I am Cara Westman's husband. I am here to see her. The nurse was genuinely nice, but she was only allowing Nick to go in. Stella patted Nick on the arm. You go on in. I will wait for you in the waiting room. Stay strong, Nick. You two have a lot of people that care about you, and we are all here to help. Nick nodded and moved quickly into his wife's room. Stella waited. Nick was in there a long time. Stella knew that if it was Alden in there, they would have to drag her out kicking and screaming. Nick eventually came out. He did not exactly look happy, but more at ease. I admit that seeing her hooked up to all those wires and IVs freaked me out. After I was in there for a bit, I realized that she is breathing on her own, and she looks like she is just sleeping. I know better, but at least she looks comfortable. Stella stood up and wrapped her arms around Nick. He held on for quite a while. Nick told Stella to scoot on home. He was going to go home. He was going to head out and meet up with Tom to show him the ropes at the shop. Tom is very good at his job. Tom could always call him if there was an issue. Nick was so relieved to have friends and family that were stepping up. They had all grown so close since Stella and Cara made up. Alden and Nick grew up together. They went to White Cloud School. They graduated together. But then they both married young. What with work and having a family, they drifted apart, only seeing each other at funerals and weddings. Stella told Nick not to worry about the kids. They were fine at their house until he figured out his next step. Stella hugged Nick goodbye. On her way out of the hospital, she felt her girls kicking. Stella laughed walking away. After such a terrible day, it felt good to smile about something. Episode 41. She's awake. 2 weeks went by. The nurses regularly pumped Cara's breast milk. When Stella saw baby Addison again, she was so chubby. Stella figured that Cara had some healthy breast milk. When the phone rang, Stella was just finishing up the lunch dishes. She's awake, Nick screamed from the other end of the phone. Stella, Cara opened her eyes and started bossing the nurses around. I cannot believe she's awake. She's okay, Stella. Nick was crying and laughing at the same time. Stella was just crying tears of relief as well as tears of joy. Alden got up and put his arms around Stella. She leaned her head on his chest. She handed Alden the phone. He took over the conversation, letting Nick know that they were on the way. Stella looked up into Alden's eyes. She's okay, Alden. I cannot believe it, but she is okay." Alden let her cry it out. They got in the van and headed for the hospital. They left the kids home with instructions to stay inside until they got back. No swimming, stay put. When they walked into Cara's room, she was fidgeting and looking irritated. Stella could not have been happier. Pop, Grandma, Nettie, Annie, and Tom were also there. "Ah, Dr. Wills, I am fine. Give me my daughter," Cara demanded. Dr. Wills chuckled. "Are you going to terrorize my entire staff, Cara? Okay, okay. Give the woman her child so she will calm down. I am all done anyway." Dr. Wills put his hands up like he was under arrest and stepped back. The nurse stepped forward and handed Addison to Cara. Cara held her close like she was never going to let go. Nick walked up and put his arm around his wife, both looking down at their beautiful baby girl. Cara glanced up at Stella. "Isn't she the most beautiful thing you ever laid your eyes on, Stella?" Stella let out a choked sob, shaking her head yes. Stella rushed over to Cara's other shoulder. She put her arm around her, looking down at Addison. "My dearest friend, the most beautiful thing I have ever seen is you awake and holding your daughter. I was so scared that we were going to lose you." Cara shook her head. "Nope, not going anywhere. Obviously, I just needed a good long nap." Cara looked back down at her daughter. Addison was acting cranky. She was sucking on her fist, getting ready to wail. Nick went back to his seat while his wife attempted to breastfeed. The nurses had warned them that it may not work because Addison was so used to being bottle fed. Cara started to open her gown to attempt to breastfeed. She was hoping that Addison would take to the breast. She had already been feeding from a bottle for 2 weeks. She was not too sure how this was going to go. Pop made a choking, squawking sound. He jumped to his feet, racing for the door. "Out of my way! No one told me this was going to turn into a nudist colony." Pop turned to make sure that Tom and Alden were following. He looked back just in time to see some skin. Pop gasped, turning swiftly. "Can't she wait till us menfolk are gone to whip out that stuff? What is this world coming to?" Pop complained loudly. Tom and Alden were following Celie out, but at a much more normal pace. Both guys were snickering at Pop's fast getaway. The women stayed. Cara told them to stay put. "We all have the same parts." Stella shook her head at Pop's horror. "Nettie, how did you and Pop ever even make Alden? Pop seems awful fearful that he might see some lady parts." Stella giggled. Cara and Annie giggled along with Stella. Nettie rolled her eyes. "Celie is fine with seeing me naked, but if he even thinks one of you girls might show a breast, too much leg, etc., he freaks out. I am not sure what his malfunction is." Nettie pointed her finger at her head, twirling it around in a circle. "The man is losing his mind and trying to take me with him," Natalie stated. The nurse was directing Cara, trying to get the baby to latch on. Cara's milk was flowing fast. Probably a good thing, because Addison seemed to be a piggy. Finally, Addison was able to latch on. She must have decided that breastfeeding was okay. The nurse was shocked. "I would not have believed it was possible if I had not seen it with my own 2 eyes. The fact that Addison has been on a bottle for 2 weeks, I thought for sure she would not take to the breast. Happily, I was proved wrong," the nurse stated. The nurse left the room to go tell all the other staff members. Nettie had questions. It was written all over her. Cara grinned at her. "Go ahead. Ask away, Nettie. You look like you're going to bust," Cara stated. "So, when you were in a coma, could you hear anything at all? Did you know what was happening? Could you hear us talking to you?" Nettie asked morbidly. Nettie looked eagerly at Cara. The other women looked curious too. Cara shook her head no. "I just woke up in the hospital, saw that my baby belly was gone, and freaked out." Annie had a look of sympathy on her face. Nettie looked disappointed. "Oh, how scary for you!" Annie exclaimed. "How do you feel about the fact that they were pumping your breasts while you were in the coma?" Nettie questioned. Stella gasped. Stella could not believe Nettie had asked that question. Cara laughed softly. She did not seem offended at all by Nettie's very personal questions. When I went into the coma, I was a B cup. I woke up with a D cup. My belly was gone, but my breast doubled. Cara grinned. Cara shrugged. I would have been angry if pumping my breast was an option and Nick said no. I really wanted to breastfeed her. She is my last baby, and I hate that my other two children have such severe food allergies. I am so happy that I can feed my baby and give her nutrition from me, Cara explained. So are you going to continue to be a diabetic from here on out? Annie asked. Oh no, my sugar started going back to normal after the baby was born. They keep poking my poor fingers, but so far so good. They seem to they seem my sugar seems to be under control. All the women made encouraging noises hearing that. Nick had stayed when the other guys left. He could not take his eyes off of his wife and daughter. He was beyond thrilled to have her back. When Cara finished buttoning her shirt, Stella stepped out. Pop, Alden, and Tom were seated on a bench talking. She told them they could come back in. She gave Pop a snarky look and said, "All breasts are covered." Pop looked skeptical. He pointed two fingers at his own eyes with one hand. Then he turned his fingers and pointed them at Stella, basically saying, "I am watching you." When the guys came back in, Nick turned to Tom. "I was wondering if we could talk at some point, Tom, about you possibly staying with my company. You did a fantastic job, and truthfully, I could use you on a full-time basis. I can make it worth your while. Health benefits, too." Tom looked excited. "I have enjoyed doing the work. I would love to discuss this with you when you are ready. Just say when." Tom said enthusiastically. Annie looked hopefully at Tom. He would be working so close to home. They had been praying for this type of opportunity. Stella caught Annie's eye. She nodded, both sisters communicating without words, their joy of the moment. All right, so we did a kind of a long reading today. I didn't want it to be all negative. I wanted you guys to, you know, the joy of Cara waking up from the coma, and Pop's a stitch and a half, so he's always fun. All right, have a great day.